Toxic Rain Raider, easily one of the fastest builds that I have ever played. This build has huge defenses, can attack from range, as well as just being insanely fast. Sometimes you get so fast that you actually can't really control the character. It really is that fast. Now the main reason that you'd want to play a build like this is because it's very, very powerful in leveling. It doesn't require almost any gear to get all the way up into yellow and red tier maps, as well as farm some early heists. That's personally what I'm going to be doing, because this is my league starter. For 3.15, I have been massively overhauling all of my builds that I'm going to be posting here, and this is no different. I've updated all of the different things within the path of building. It was getting a little bit old, so pretty much every single section has seen massive improvements. There are new multiple skill trees, including one that requires cluster jewels and one that does not, including new and improved intuitive leveling trees that should make a lot more sense for you leveling up. There are also crafting notes on any of the pieces of gear that you might be confused about crafting yourself, and how to obtain some of the other uniques as well in the notes. Speaking of notes, as with all of my builds that I'm putting out now, the notes have been modernized and massively updated. There is a ton of good information in these notes now, and everything that you need should be within them. Now, I know that some of you are not able to use Path of Building, so if that's the case, we have made complete dedicated channels within my Discord that's linked down in the description for anyone who isn't able to access Path of Building. Maybe you're a console player, or you're on a computer that does not have access to it. If that's the case, make sure to join my Discord, and there will be dedicated channels for all of my builds. Now, patch 3.15 is a pretty big update to the game. This patch is going to have a giant shift in character power, and we really don't particularly know exactly how everything is going to go. So my goal is that as we get these updates and as we figure out what is best and what's going on, I will update the Path of Building for this to account for anything that we do learn. So make sure to check back on this video occasionally if you're wanting to see all of the latest updates or if anything new happens to pop up. Now, I do want to give a bit of a disclaimer here. As I said previously, 3.15 is going to be a massive nerf to character power. Don't expect builds to play the same exact way that they did in previous leagues. Damage has been overall nerfed, Act 1 has been increased in difficulty, and the overall game will be slightly slower and slightly more difficult. So if you are having issues, it may not just be you, the game has just simply become more difficult. Now, some things that you should expect specifically about Toxic Rain Raider. This build is absolutely excellent in the early game, and even though the build has gotten a few nerfs, it should still absolutely be perfectly fine. The Raider did sustain a 50% nerf to their elemental ailment avoidance, however this can be accounted for with just a few skill points on the tree. On top of that, it did lose a little bit of onslaught effect, but this accounts to only a little bit of movement and attack speed, and it really isn't as big of a deal as some people might think. This build is solid on all levels. It is specialized in clear, and you can absolutely zoom through the game at ludicrous speed while killing everything in your path. However, with the addition of a concentrated effect nowadays, ever since the change to Toxic Rain, bossing is still perfectly possible. Now, this won't do the most boss damage in the game, but it does some pretty solid deeps. When it comes to gearing, the initial cost of the gear is simply a Quill Rain, a Thief's Torment, and some random rares. You don't need anything else to get through most of the mapping experience. And that's all of the gear that you're going to need to farm heists early on as well. Heisting is going to be my personal strategy for making money early on in the league. I'm going to be using the Toxic Rain Raider to do it, and hopefully it goes pretty solid. So now that you've got an idea of what you're getting into, let's jump into the game and take a little bit of a closer look. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content, make sure that you like this video so that other people can enjoy it too. And if you're part of the huge percentage of people who are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel, make sure that you do that so that these videos will show right up in your feed. You can always change your mind later, and I greatly appreciate all of your guys' support. Now, without further ado, let's get back into the video. Alright boys, this is going to be the Toxic Rain Raider. Now I did make a build guide for this earlier in 3.14, however that was a more basic, just early farming build guide, and hello there little bird. So it wasn't too in-depth. I have gone a little bit more in-depth this time around, so we've got a little bit more information. You can do some higher end stuff, some lower end stuff, and everything in between. Now this video is going to be a little bit different than most of my build guide videos, especially League Start ones, because we have spent an absolute absurd amount of time, and I am massively sleep deprived right now, because we have spent all kinds of energy on this path of building, getting everything ready, getting everything as correct as I can possibly get it, and making sure that you guys have as much information as you need. So later on in the video, we will be going in depth into the path of building. I'll show you all the information that's in there so you know what to look for. All of that is in the description down below. Now, when it comes to league starting as this build, I have been testing it over at twitch.tv/bigducks, which you should go follow, by the way. This is the one that ended up feeling the best for me. Raider is extremely fast. Even with the nerfs, it's still going to be super fast, and it just has such solid defensive layers. It doesn't require very much gear to get going, and it's just going to be a lot of fun. I think that this build will be really, really solid for League Start. So I want to talk a little bit about the abilities that we've got here, and starting off, as always, we do have Withering Step. Now, Withering Step is an ability that does apply withered stacks to enemies as long as they are in this green circle that you see here when you use another ability. Withering Step also does apply elusive to your character, which gives you some movement speed, it gives you some dodge and some spell dodge. We do get some effectiveness of elusive from our passive tree here, and also we do gain elusive on kill occasionally as well. Now the thing about Withering Step is that it will replace elusive that you already do have on, and when you do use an ability, it immediately ends the elusive, so keep that in mind. This ability is very, very powerful for single target, and it is required that you stand near the enemy and stack up these Withering Step stacks to get the most out of your damage. Now, if you want to, you could do a Withering Totem early on, that would be perfectly fine, but I personally prefer Withering Step. Now, keeping in line with movement skills, we do have Flame Dash. Now, Flame Dash does share a cooldown with Withering Step, and we don't have any other movement ability that we use. However, the Raider is simply just so fast that you genuinely don't need another movement ability. Now, it's not going to be this fast because Adrenaline did get nerfed a little bit, but you know, we can always remember the good times, am I right, boys? So, a couple things to remember about Flame Dash is that you do not want to spam this ability. If you spam Flame Dash, you're going to incur a little bit of a cast speed. So if you just use Flame Dash occasionally, it is instant cast. However, if you do spam Flame Dash back to back, I cast very, very quickly on this build, so you're not really going to be able to tell, but it does gain a little bit of cast time. I have a ridiculous amount of cast speed on an attack-based build because of all of my onslaught effect that I've got going here. Now, we do use Blood Rage. You don't have to use this, but it is quite solid. It gives us a bunch of attack speed, which is very good for the build. The attack physical damage leech is basically 0. We don't do almost any physical damage whatsoever. And then on top of that, it does give us our source of generating frenzy charges while we're clearing. You can get an alt quality of Blood Rage that will allow you to generate them on bosses. It's typically insanely expensive, so don't expect to get that anytime soon. Now, beyond that, we have our main ability, which is Toxic Rain. Now, Toxic Rain is a projectile attack, and as you see, it's going to spawn these little pods here on the ground. Now, the way that Toxic Rain works is that you are mainly wanting to scale your damage over time, just generic damage over time. Also do want to scale attack speed, because you are going to want to get as many of these pods on the ground popping on top of enemies as you possibly can. Now, if you pay attention here, you'll see that they kind of go in just a random spread. The projectiles do go in a random area, and typically about 4 of them will hit one target at a time. When you do use Concentrated Effect, it's a little bit easier to hit one target with them at a time, but you can swap out Concentrated Effect for Efficacy now. Efficacy is really good for this build at the moment. They changed it to be increased duration instead of spell damage, so it is really strong. You can just swap out Concentrated Effect for Efficacy and be perfectly fine. Moving on to some of our other abilities, we do have Flesh and Stone. This is going to be in a stone stance. This makes it so that nearby enemies are blinded, and enemies that are outside of our little circle, this is the nearby circle that you see here, we take less damage from them. A very good defensive layer. You pretty much never want to go into a Flesh stance. It doesn't do absolutely anything for us. We don't do any physical damage, so don't worry about that. Just stay in stone. Beyond that, we do use a couple other auras as well. We're using a Malevolence aura. It's just a bunch of damage. We do have a level 1 Vitality on because I am using a Watcher's Eye that has life gained for each enemy hit while affected by Vitality. This is very, very powerful. It is extremely expensive early on in the league. Don't expect to get this. You can instead simply use a Thief's Torment very early on. All of that is detailed in the Path of Building. I'll talk more about it later. Beyond that, we do use a Clarity. You do want to level up the Clarity just enough that it allows you to maintain your mana. In the Path of Building, I've done some updates around this using things like Replica Conqueror's Efficiency and some different cluster jewels and such to account for the mana changes that we're going to be seeing in 3.15. Now, last but not least, we do have an Asinus Chant, and Asinus Chant is a relatively expensive item early on, so don't worry too much about this. You can simply continue to use a Ballista Totem setup for your Toxic Rain early on until you're able to swap over to this. But once you do, we are going to be using Greater Multiple Projectiles, Ball Lightning, and Slower Proj. These are the big blue balls that you're seeing shoot out of my weapon every so often. The reason that we're doing this is Ball Lightning hits extremely consistently and a lot of times. So because we have that Vitality Watcher's Eye, we're getting a ton of life back from doing that, on top of just our normal hits from our weapon. Now, we do have our Despair in here. That is our curse. Keep in mind that in 3.15, triggered abilities abilities will cost mana. As long as you have minus mana cost on all of your gear, as well as the Replica Conqueror's efficiency, later on, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. We also do use Vol Haste. I just had an extra slot. Vol Haste is pretty good for going even faster than we were before. And last but not least, we do have a cast when damage taken, Immortal Call, increased duration, and feeble. Keep in mind that cast when damage taken is also going to incur a mana cost in 3.15, so we may need to mess around with these numbers. I've done so in the Path of Building. And that is pretty much it for all of the skills that we use on this build. So I do want to go ahead and show you guys a map. We have a random map that I've rolled here. I just hit it with an alchemy orb. Not too crazy modifiers, LE weakness, 2 additional projectiles, and nothing else really. Increased AoE might be interesting on this map, we'll have to see. We also do have a Elder Scarab, Piranha Scarab, Harbinger Scarab, and Metamorph Scarab. We're going to be running this with standard quality, no master missions or anything extra. Now, of course, this is going to be on Awakener 8, and as you saw, there's going to be a bunch of Sextants on this area. It's all big damage, extra damage taken Sextants, and Awakener 8 as always. Now, as I've been saying all throughout this video, this build is just about going fast. There's nothing really else to this build, it just goes fast. Now, early on when you're initially leveling this build, it's not going to be this fast, and even in the later game, it's not going to be this fast because they did nerf Onslaught a little bit and a little bit of the movement speed in the other trees, but you can still get some pretty ludicrous speed. Now, this version of the build that you're seeing right here is very close to the medium tier of gear that you're going to see in Path of Building. I don't have any of the extra crazy stuff, like I don't have like elusive Tailwind Onslaught boots or anything insane like that. I've got relatively basic gear. The most expensive pieces of gear right now would obviously just be the Kintsugi, the Asinus Chant, as well as the Crafted Bow. You don't actually need the Kintsugi to be linked, so that is a bonus for this build, because we put our ability in our weapon. Now, when we're talking about playstyle, this is an extremely smooth build to play. As you're moving through the map, you've only really got one ability. You zoom really fast. If you put Withering Step on left click, you're not gonna have to worry about it that often. It's perfectly easy to use for bosses as well. You just stand on top of them. Well, I can just show you here. So you're gonna come up to the boss and you're just going to stand on top of it if I can find him. Just gonna stand on top of him, hit Withering Step every once in a while, and just stack up those Toxic Rains. Now, this is like most damage over time builds where you do kind of have to scale the damage over time going for it. Very similar to like a poison build, however, it is not poison. Do keep that in mind. The build's got tons of dodge, tons of spell dodge, a good amount of evasion. It has permanent phasing, permanent onslaught, permanent immunity to elemental ailments, and it does maintain its permanent immunity to elemental ailments if you do take the passives on the skill tree. We will be moving into these passive nodes instead of just having 100% unaffectedness by ailments. Unfortunately, the Raider did get nerfed a little bit, but we've got these nodes that we can take. I'm personally just going to go through the middle path just to get freeze and chill immunity. You can take shock and ignite immunity if you want, but I don't think it's completely necessary. Now, as I said previously, you just stand up on the boss, you pop down your Toxic Rains, and you go to town, and that's pretty much all you need to worry about. As I said, this is a quite dangerous map, Tier 16, Awakener 8. It's got whatever mods on it, nothing really special there, but we can kind of just pretty much ignore everything, even taking 12% increased damage of a whole bunch of different types. So as you can see, build does quite a bit of damage, is relatively strong, and it does go zoom, zoom, zoomy, zoom. Now that is going to be pretty much it for the demo of the build. I've shown you pretty much everything you need to know about gameplay, about the skills and all of that. So now we're going to jump into Path of Building so I can give you a little bit of closer look at all of the work that we've done on these Path of Buildings. So let's go ahead and move over. Alright, so now that we are over here in the Path of Building, we have done quite a few updates to this build. Now, all builds have kind of gotten hit at least somewhat in the damage department. This build is no different. Pretty much every single build in the game suffered some kind of damage loss. However, this one is going to be perfectly fine in my opinion. Now, one of the main updates that we have done to this is that there are going to be a bunch of different trees. These trees are going to be quite a bit more intuitive than they were before. The leveling should be more straightforward. We've also got a Cluster Jewel path, a no Cluster Jewel path, as well as a Divine Flesh Jibakwa Glorious Vanity tree that some people like using. I'm not a huge fan of it because I don't play hardcore. But as always, I do like to go through these trees just so I can kind of give you an idea of what my mindset is and why I take the points that I do. So very early on, remember that we are just starting Caustic Arrow, Toxic Rain. We start as the main build that we're going to be playing later. So very early, we're going to be pathing through projectile damage. We're moving up towards here, grabbing chaos damage over time and chaos resistance. On the next set, we're going to be moving over to the right, grabbing some damage and life, as well as some damage and damage over time nodes nodes here. The next step that we're going to be taking is moving up. We're going to grab this damage and movement speed through these damage over time nodes, as well as this attack and cast speed and these life nodes. The next step that we're going to take is moving up around this to the right. We're going to grab these life nodes on the way, grab these elusive nodes because this is going to give us quite a bit of movement speed while we're clearing through the game, and then come over, grab these damage nodes. After this, we're going to move back down. We're going to move over towards our dodge. I know a lot of people don't like getting the phase acrobatics early on. I personally enjoy getting it. I like to be able to turn my brain off when I'm leveling these kinds of builds, and being able to dodge spells 30% of the time is pretty nice. Now, in the previous set, I did miss this one. We do get our first ascendant point, and that is going to be Rapid Assault. This just gives us perma onslaught at all times. It's 20 attack, cast, and movement speed. It's very powerful. It used to be more powerful, but what can you do? Now, back to where we were. The next step that we're going to take is coming down here towards Master Fletcher. These are just going to be a bunch of damage nodes. It gives you like damage over time with bow skills as well as attack speed. The next step that we're going to take is moving over to the left. We're going to be grabbing this life and flask nodes, these attack based nodes over here, which are pretty solid, some life as well as Wind Dancer. This is around the time that we're going to be getting our second lab, which is Avatar of the Chase. This is going to increase the effect of our onslaught substantially, as well as giving us a bunch more chance to evade melee and projectile attacks. This is a very solid node. This is where you start really zooming. The next thing that we're going to be doing is moving over to the left side of the tree. This is where we obtain some of our elemental ailment avoidance. Now you could skip these nodes early on and get them later, but you might as well while you're here. We're going to take the middle path. You can take these other two nodes if you do want to be completely avoiding all ailments, but I think that chill and freeze is going to be enough. We come through here, get these damage nodes, move up through here, get this increased duration. Increased duration is very, very good for the build, some resistances and some life. After this, we are going to be getting our third lab. That is going to be Quartz Infusion. This gives us a bunch of extra dodge, adding to the dodge that we already have from the skill tree, as well as perma phasing. This build gets perma onslaught and perma phasing, which is pretty cool, meaning you can just move through enemies at will. Beyond that, we are going to be moving into the final tree of the leveling section. This is where we are going to be getting our fourth ascendancy, as well as just filling in some extra points. This is around where you're going to be getting like jewels like this one, this jewel slot here, this jewel slot here, this jewel slot here. It's the main thing that you're really going to be getting when you're upgrading here. When it comes to these jewels, you're just going to want to get life and any good mods that you can possibly find. Attack speed with bows is really solid, and then just any generic damage nodes. Now, as I said before, this is also our fourth ascendancy. This is when we get Avatar of the Veil. 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments while phasing, which we are perma phasing. We also do have nearby enemies have 20% less accuracy rating while you have phasing. That's pretty solid. So we have 50% from there. We do get a little bit here, but that isn't as important. So we've got 50%. We've got 65% from here, 70% from here, and then 30% for chill and freeze here. That adds up to 100%. If you do grab these two, it will make it so that it's 100% ignite and 100% shock avoidance. I don't think that they're absolutely necessary. You could always do that if you like. Now, this is also the point where we're going to be doing a little bit of respecking. If you didn't notice, when we move between these trees and grab all of these jewels, you'll notice that we move down to these life points here because this is not as efficient as we'd like to be. So when we move into this next tree, you're going to fill into these nodes down here as you level up, and then remove all of these nodes. Now, at this point is when we have a choice to make. I personally feel that the cluster tree for this build is extremely powerful. However, these clusters can be quite expensive early on. Keep in mind that if you check the notes, there is information on a cheaper set of clusters that you can get early on, but we're going to be going with the cluster path first. And when you initially get the cluster path, the first two things that you are going to want to do if you do have extra money is you're going to want to get a very large thread of hope. This is an extremely powerful thread of hope because you're able to get these potency of will and skill duration nodes. This Harrier node, you can grab overcharged if you want to, but it's not super useful. And then you can also grab profane chemistry. The other thing that we can do is we can put an intuitive leap in this slot here, which allows us to get charisma, allows us to get method to the madness, and this 1 chaos damage over time multiplier. Charisma makes it a little bit easier for us to deal with our mana. You also can take this reduced reservation node here if you have even more mana problems. And then there are these 2 mana nodes here that also will give you a little bit of mana on kill and some maximum mana if you need it. Remember that mana is getting heavily nerfed in this next patch, so be aware that you might need some of those things. The next step that we're going to be taking is starting our cluster jewels. We're moving into our first 2 points. We're grabbing Unholy Grace and Misery Everlasting. Now remember, you might have different cluster jewels. It might not be the same exact points. Just keep in mind this is around what you're trying to do. The next step is going to be getting our first set of mediums. Eldritch Inspiration is very powerful here because it's going to give you maximum mana as well as mana regeneration. And then Wicked Paul gives chaos damage as well as skill effect duration. Both of these are just very solid, and then another normal jewel. The next step that we're going to be taking is getting another medium. It's the same exact stats, nothing too different there. And then the last step is going to be filling in some life, as well as grabbing just these final Wicked Paul nodes, which are just a little bit more damage. Now, taking a step back, we're going to be moving to the no cluster tree, where a couple things are going to be different. If you take a look here, if you go to this tree here and we use this compare button, if you didn't know, this compare button allows you to look at the differences between trees. You'll see that these two trees, the main difference is we're just going to be pathing all the way up here to Potency of Will. Now, the reason that we do this is because these nodes are very powerful, and if you're doing the no cluster tree, you're probably not going to be able to afford a Thread of Hope as well as all of the other jewels, so we're going to be skipping those for right now. So you're going to path all the way up here, grab this mana regen and life regen, as well as grab the skill effect duration here. The next step that you're going to be doing is you're going to be moving up to the top side of the tree. You're going to be grabbing this life here, as well as this chaos damage over time here. And then the last step that you're going to be doing is going to be just simply filling in some life nodes, as well as these attack speed and damage over time with bow skills. That is pretty much it for this tree. This is significantly less efficient because you do have to do all of this traveling and all this moving around, but it is about as good as you can get. Now, with an honorable mention at the end, we do have this Divine Flesh tree. This is just going to be a slight difference. We are going to be using a Glorious Vanity here on the tree that allows us to have Divine Flesh. You do need to stack maximum chaos resist if you can get it. If you're using Divine Flesh and you don't have at least max chaos resist, you're kidding yourself and you're not going to be doing any good. This is a good way to make it so that you take significantly less elemental damage. However, I do feel that the build already doesn't take that much elemental damage because we're mostly immune to ailments. We have a ton of dodge, a ton of spell dodge, and all kinds of defensive layers. I don't feel that this is super necessary. If you want to do it, you can. So we'll move back to our cluster tree here, and we will start looking at the skills. There is not much for me to go over here, if I'm being honest with you. These are very basic skills, and it's most of the stuff that we were talking about before. Remember that the order of the gems does matter here. You should use in order from top to bottom. We do use Caustic Arrow, Toxic Rain Selfcast, as well as a Toxic Rain Ballista. Now, you might be able to use the new Focused Ballista support with this. It's probably good. I don't 100% know, especially if you've got like a Quill Rain, it's probably pretty good. Beyond that, we do use a couple auras here. You might need to disable these early on if you're having problems with mana. Smoke Mine is still really solid. Flame Dash will be your main movement for getting across things. And then we've got Cast When Damage Taken. Remember about the mana cost. Beyond that, all of the abilities that I showed you in game, there's nothing too special here. Remember that you don't need any of the alt qualities on anything here. They're just showing you which ones are useful to you at any given time. Now, talking about the items, we do have 3 sets of items here. So in the budget items, you'll notice that we're just going to be using a Quill Rain, a Thief's Torment, and some random stuff. This plus the tree with no clusters should be able to handle early farming all the way up into yellow maps, early red maps, as well as most heist farming. Should be able to handle it as long as you do scale that life and you get all of the items that you do require. Make sure that you get those resistances up. This should be enough to get you quite a bit of money. When you move into your first set of items, you're going to be getting a crafted bow. I talk about this in the notes. There's a full explanation on how to craft these bows. It's gotten significantly harder this patch because they have moved the damage over time multiplier into the suffix slot. More information in there. This is around the time that you're going to get an Aesinus as well as a Kintsugi. An unlinked Kintsugi hopefully shouldn't be too insanely expensive in the first week or two. We'll have to see how much it costs, but you never really know. Aesinus Chant will be expensive early on, I can pretty much guarantee. It's a very, very solid helmet, but if you can't get it, just continue to use the Ballista version of Toxic Rain before you get this helmet. Beyond that, we do have the flasks that I talked about before. If you can't get a hold of these, just use the flasks that are in the budget section. Moving on to the expensive section, the main differences here are going to just be that the items are simply better. We've got like an amulet that has chaos damage over time multiplier on it, some chaos skill gems, we've got like boots that have tailwind, we've got gloves that have more damage over time and damage over time multiplier on them. Kintsugi has got +2 to level of aura gems. This is simply just because we do slot our auras in our chest piece. Aesinus Chant has an enchant, and nothing else is really too insanely different beyond that. Now, talking about the configuration, this is relatively fair in my opinion. We do have frenzy charges. Remember that this is going to be for just clearing a map and finishing off the boss. There are notes about the configuration of what you can change for, say, something like Cirrus or Shaper or something like that. We have Perma Onslaught, Perma Phasing. We do have Elusive pretty consistently. We pretty much always have Flasks active, but I can actually disable that. That one doesn't matter that much. We're always going to be in Sand Stance, and we can get roughly 4 pods overlapping at any given time. Most of the time, it's going to be anywhere from 3 to 5. I don't think it's pretty much ever going to be more than that with the amount of AoE that we have scaled. Then beyond that, we do have 6 Withered stacks, and we are igniting a little bit. As long as you have a tiny amount of crit and fire damage, you will be able to ignite. This is simply for Cinder Swallow. It gives a little bit of extra damage. As for the withered stacks, it's probably closer to 9 is around what this number would be, but to be fair, I've brought it down to 6. It's on Cirrus, Awakener 8. Remember that we do have these notes here. These are extensive. They have a bunch of information in here, frequently asked questions, talking about leveling up, the general playstyle, cluster jewels, ascendancy, how to craft all of the gear. We've got all this information here, like how to craft the bow, how to craft some like elusive tailwind onslaught boots, and all kinds of good stuff in here. And that is pretty much everything that you're going to need to know. So now remember, if you do have any further questions, anything that I haven't answered in this video, or you're just wondering what's up, you want to talk about all the different builds and all the kinds of stuff like that, make sure that you join my Discord channel. It is linked down in the description. There is a specific channel made for this build in the Discord. It will be updated over time as we do get time. You know, some of us are going to want to actually play the League start as well, so keep that in mind. There's a bunch of helpful people over there. I'd love for you to become a part of the community. Also, don't forget that I stream Monday through Friday, 11 to 4 at twitch.tv/BigDucks. We'll probably be streaming a lot for the League start. I haven't been able to stream as much because I've been making all these videos recently, but we're going to get back into streaming here in the next couple of days. So if you want to ask particularly me a question or something like that, make sure to come hang out with your boy. So thank you for all your support. I do appreciate each and every one of you. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it so that other people can enjoy it as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in raid class. And I will see you all in 3.15 Expedition League.